Hi, this is Capel, and this is the quarterly update for LESS for winter 2017. So very briefly, the project goal of LESS is to develop a system that allows for low effort contributions of small data pieces like one or two small questions at a time from on-the-go crowds that, when you combine, will give you and scaffold high-fidelity data that would rival the quality of a time-sensitive survey done by one person. Um, Additionally, the system should be able to address any coverage or fidelity goals that are set by the researcher without being intrusive in users' lives. So, to make that a little bit more specific about what the goals of this project are, we have two research questions. The first is, how can we create a system that allows for low effort and low fidelity contributions about physical locations from on-the-go crowds that can then be scaffolded up to create high fidelity data? The second question is, given that we can gather and scaffold data from the first, how can we then ensure that given a physical search space, so for example all of Northwestern, we can meet the coverage and fidelity goals by encouraging users to actually go to locations that they would not normally pass without any monetary incentives. So just for example, using the data that's already in the system as an incentive. So for this quarter, there's a big focus on making sure that the design of the system was right in terms of how do we ensure that the data that we have is incentivizing to users, and that took two parts. So the first was a bit of need finding and a bit of work around how we make sure that people are confident in the data that they're receiving and that they feel that the data that they're giving is actually worthwhile and being used by the community. And so for that, what we found was that users like to see who is contributing each piece of information because it makes it seem more realistic. When it's just a bunch of data there from someone on some app like Less that you don't really have a company to or a face to, it kind of feels like the data might not actually be realistic and it's just being like pre-populated for testing. In this case, if you actually put someone's name or even picture by it, then you have you have some sort of mapping to it being from a real person. And that makes it a little bit more reliable. This is reflecting how websites like Yelp and Amazon Reviews do their reviewing system. Additionally, one thing we found from the testing was that it actually helps to reinforce a system model for the application, so people understand more about how the actual notifications are being used and how the data from the notifications is being used and put together. The second thing that we found was that users want to know that their contributions are helping people. So we built a really simple profile page that shows how many people your contributions have helped. We also found that from that it's actually less important to see what contributions they've made. Most users said they didn't really care to be able to go through all of their contributions. The only ones that might be interesting are if someone wanted to know about a place and they mark that as a new location, rather than responding to an existing notification. After this, then the second step for this quarter was to see how we can start using data to actually incentivize people to go to places. And in that, part of the work that I did for my user study, which we'll talk about later, was to actually find out things that people wanted to do so I can build it into their applications. And this inadvertently allowed us to do some need finding about what other things people wanted to know. And we found here was interesting because before, the way we did need finding was more along like what things you would like to track about physical spaces. Whereas here, we started seeing a trend towards like knowing actual items in the space, for example. So not just if a space is available, but also like are there monitors, or in the case of gyms, like treadmills or squat racks, for example, available. Additionally, there's a lot more specificity with what people want to know. So for example, one user said that they wanted to know when a specific menu item was available at a campus cafe. And finally, there's also this notion of time that we're starting to see a lot more, where someone wants to know if something's available at like a campus cafe, for example, at closing time. It's a very specific use case, but we start seeing these other like classes of use cases now that we can start designing around. So here's a really quick look at the technology, and we'll get into this more in the demo. But over here we have three screens. The first on the furthest left is the new main screen where you see where you're located with the blue dot, and you also see any marked locations that are around you. If you click on that pin, so for example, this pin was a coffee shop called Coffee Lab, you can actually start seeing who's contributed what piece of information and at what time they've contributed at. So you also get a sense of what the most recent information is, how old the information that you're viewing. And then finally, on the furthest right screen is a profile screen where you see how many notifications that you've responded to, locations that you've marked, and how many people have used your notifications to help them act on what they're doing or help them respond to other notifications. The next piece of technology implemented was a way to be able to send long-distance notifications to users so that we can start to see if that's actually, the data itself is actually an incentive to go to a location if you're not already there. So what we built was a really simple hard-coded notification setup that presented a notification 90 meters away from the location. And this distance was chosen on purpose because it's less than 1 block, but it's still far away from the location itself. So you're still maybe you can still maybe go into other buildings or like go in a separate way. But it's also close enough that there's less likelihood of the location being notified for is on a crossroad where the user would have to go to it and then double back in order to get to where they want to go. We wanted to avoid this because it would add an unintentional bias if people didn't go to the location. And then, using this, we present 2 different levels of information. Simply low and high level information, once per day at most per location. So as an example, SPAC is a gym here on campus, and a low level information says that it might not be crowded right now, whereas a higher level information would be that there are treadmills available because I really want to know about treadmill availability. From this, we were able to run a 1-week-long user study where the goal was to see how users will respond to notifications when they're told about locations that they're interested in at a distance away from it, given 2 different levels of information. And the goals were, I wanted to learn if the people will go to the location given a high-level information, if they would go to given a low-level information, and if they didn't go, what would the primary factors be that prevented them from going. And to do this study, we ran 7 users from DTR for 1 week. We had each of them give us 2 to 3 locations that they're interested in, and for each location, we created a low level of information and a high level of information notification messages that we coded into custom applications for each users. One thing we didn't do yet is ask them for contributions. So all we wanted to see is if the user would go there or not necessarily tell us more about the location yet. And the way we assessed and gathered evidence on whether or not this was working is we notified each user by Slack at the end of the day asking if they went to the locations or not. And we use that qualitative evidence as to influence our findings. So the findings that we found were that if a user didn't go, most of the time they were going somewhere else. We found that scheduling was the biggest reason that people would not go to a location, whether it had to be for class or they were running late to another meeting or just needed to be somewhere in general. Very, very rarely did the users not actually want to go to the location itself. Only in a couple of cases that people were like on their way home for no purpose, like just going home. They did not want to go study, for example, or not want to go to the gym because they didn't feel like going at that time. When users did go, most of the time they were planning to go to the location or somewhere near it. This is inherently limiting in the study because a lot of locations that people were interested were study spaces. So they would, if they were going to the location to study, it's not important that they got the notification then because they were going to go study anyway. But if it wasn't the location itself, one thing that we found was that having the notification wasn't enough of an incentive to go to the specific place. So, for example, in one of our engineering buildings, a lot of times users would go to the place and start looking for free food, even if they didn't have any specific place to be. And one quote from a user that I found was, "I wasn't going to go, but the notification affirmed my decision to," which is interesting And it's made more interesting by the fact that from the data that we've collected so far, the level of information itself doesn't actually seem to affect the decision. It's more that if the user doesn't have any place to be and they will go to the location, they would go just because of the notification itself. Additionally, we found that some locations you have to actually notify much further away from 90 meters to actually be effective. Two of those include gyms and study spaces, because with gyms, a lot of people said that if they wanted to go there, they would need to first prepare, like drop off their school stuff or their backpack and change into workout clothes before going. And study spaces was opposite. They need to go and get study materials or get stuff that they would be able to work on in like a library or in a study space. Some limitations of the study include that it was only tested for levels of information and not other variables. Those variables include schedule and just generally time of day. But also we didn't test to see if users would go to areas that are not of interest to them but in their path. So for example, if they were walking by a theater that they didn't really care about, but they were walking by anyway, would they still be able to contribute information? Additionally, because the distance was relatively close, it's very likely that a user was going there anyway, and that the information level would not have been influential at that point. The next steps to improve this study would be to increase the distance and see if that level is still motivating. And additionally, we would want to test other notification policies, like notifying people at a time of day, or being able to predict a destination and telling them to go to somewhere that's in the path to destination. Finally, we want to be able to begin asking for contributions about these locations, as this begins to address our second research question of can we start to fill these data gaps and fidelity gaps? And as mentioned before, even if the location isn't of interest, but it's still in a path to a destination, would user respond? And with that, we'll do a quick demo of our tech. Okay, so here's a quick demo of some of the tech that we built this quarter. These are both what long-distance notifications would look like. The bottom one is a low-level information that tells me that the campus gym isn't too crowded, fact that I want to know about. So for example, I really care about treadmills being available in SPAC. So it tells me that not only is it not crowded, but I can also go for each of these notifications. There's not actually a way to contribute more data right now, because for our study we only cared about if users would go there or not and what would prevent them or allow them to go. In the future, these would be very similar to older notifications where you could respond and tell us more information about the place. For now, I'm going to ignore them and just open up Less. So this is the new UI for Less. Big reason for building it out like this was that it's more standard with other iOS applications, and it's also so that we can start adding in more pages and more content for users. So on the main map screen, we can see pins that have been marked by either other people or the system marking locations based on what the researcher wants to gather. And if we click on it, we can see what this place is, what's being tracked, and how far away it is from us. When we then open it up, we can start seeing pieces of information that have been responded to and who's responding to it by these little like profile views. We can also go to our own profile, where on load it tells us how many notifications we've responded to, any location that we've marked, and also how many people have seen the responses that we've given to other notifications. We can also on the map see where we've marked locations and look at some of the recent contributions that we've made. And finally, there's a help screen that isn't implemented yet. And that's Less.